Welcome everybody to a very cool and important episode in this series where we're going to be building a custom hook. We've used hooks throughout our application, so we've used useState, useFetch, useLocation, useNavigate. Well, each one of these introduces some functionality into our application. Well, if we ever have some functionality that we want to repeat throughout our application, we can create our own hook. In our case, we're going to build a useFetch hook, which is going to allow us to isolate all the fetching logic in one location. And then anytime we need to get something from our API, we can just use that hook and save like a gajillion lines of code. So wherever you're making an API call, such as in our example, we have this definition page and we have a use effect and all this stuff here, basically like 20 or more lines of code, we can remove this all and introduce a custom hook. That custom hook is going to look something like this. You could say const, and let's say we have a variable called word. Since this is for a definition, that's pretty much the same as the state we have here, but we can now get this from our custom hook, which we could call useFetch. So useFetch will just get that word for us, and then we can just use it throughout our application. That will prevent us from having to write all this code over and over again for every single page that we need to get some data. It's going to save a lot of problems. Then all we'll need to do is just take this URL and pass it into useFetch, and we pretty much should be good to go. To do this, we're going to have to generalize a little bit because we're going to use this hook for multiple pages. So when we define it, it's going to be pretty general. So instead of talking about words and definitions, we'll talk about data. To create this hook, we're going to create a new folder inside of source. So we'll just call this hooks. And I'm going to create a new hook called useFetch. Now I'm still following my Pascal case convention I started with this series, but you can use whatever convention you want. I would just say be sure to name it correctly here, where we're going to say export default function useFetch, and I'm using camel case here. Now in here we can use any other hooks or React functionality, so we will import useState and useEffect from React. And this is going to allow us to have our own state. So const data and set data is going to be useState. And then we will have a useEffect. This is going to actually invoke the fetch call. Now the actual URL to pass in is going to come from the parameter here. So we'll say URL. It'll be passed in as an argument when we invoke this. So similar to right here, useFetch, we pass that data in. That's going to be assigned to this parameter here. And then we can just drop it down here like so. And then we will get the response. So response, and we will say return response.json. That also gives us a promise. So .then. And in here, we will just set data to the data that's going to come from response.json. So set data, data. So this is a pretty familiar structure if you've been following this series so far. Now, the next thing we need is an empty dependency array to make this execute only on initial load. The final thing we need is a return. In this case, we can return data. So after data is assigned a value, it'll come back into definition and be assigned to this word here. Then we will be responsible to do any traversing that we were originally doing, such as data of 0.meanings. We will do that in this file, and we could do that down here. Right now, by default, this isn't going to work until we make those changes, which I'm going to show you how to do in just a second, but for now, I'm just going to return a paragraph, work in progress. So this is because I want to focus first on just making sure we get the correct value over into this page. So we need to import useFetch from, and this is going to come from one directory up inside of hooks useFetch. Perfect. So we're not getting any errors in the terminal. Now over in the browser, we can access dictionary/hello, and it says work in progress, which is what we were expecting. We're not getting any errors yet. So far, so good. What I want to do now is I want to create a useEffect just to verify these values. So this will be sure we're checking what the value is after the state is done loading. So we'll say console log word. Now immediately word is not going to have a value, but once that fetch is done, it'll be assigned a value which contains the API response. Now we just need to adjust our traversal to grab the correct data and to do it optionally so that we don't end up throwing any exceptions. So instead of returning work in progress, we're going to say word question mark dot square bracket 0 question mark dot. So this is the syntax to say we want to grab the item with index 0 in the word array, and if word doesn't exist, return undefined, and then do the same exact thing, grab the meanings, and if that doesn't exist on the item with the index 0, return undefined. That way we're not going to get any exceptions. Instead, nothing will be displayed on the page. And then here we're going to do something similar where we say word index 0 dot meanings. However, we don't need to use the question mark because at this point inside of the ternary, we are confident that meanings has a value. So we'll save, and we get the value displayed on the page. So everything seems to be working as it was originally. We can try it out. Dinosaur. Cool. If you're confident now, you can remove the values being printed to the console and you're good to go. However, it doesn't work too well if we get a 404. It just breaks. So what we're going to talk about now is how we can build in error capabilities into our custom hook. So let's go ahead and create a new state, and it's going to be error status and set error status. I'm using error status versus just error because I want to get this to be the status code whenever possible, and this will come from useState. So what we'll do is we'll check if there is not an OK response. If this is the case, we will throw response.status. This can then be caught after this final then inside of a catch. So this will be a function which has an error parameter, and we will just assign this to error status. So set error status and pass in E. But in order to see this error on the outside, we not only will return data, but we will also return the error. So error status inside of an array. This will allow us to create two variables to store this information. So not only will we have word, but we will also have error status. This is going to take the place of this error here, and it will also serve the purpose of checking for a not found. So we won't need either of those. So when we save this, we get an error, and that is because we are now referring to these variables that don't exist. I'm going to fix that in a moment, but similar to what we did earlier, I'm going to comment it out for a second and just console log this inside a useEffect to make sure we're getting the right values. So not only do we want to console log word, but we also want to console log the error status and just make sure that we're getting that error on this page. So when we visit a page that doesn't exist, such as Texas, we get word is undefined and the error status is the number 404. So it appears we're getting that value correctly. So now if you want to take a stab at refactoring our code to work as it once did using this new error status, go ahead and give it a shot. Otherwise, let's just jump in. What we will do is we will go down to where we had this if not found. We're going to uncomment this section. And instead of checking for not found, we will check if the error status is equal to 404. So it's that simple of a change. Similarly for the error, all we need to do is just check to see if error status exists. So if it's defined and it's not 404, then something else went wrong. So let's make sure that the 404 works. It appears that it is. And let's go ahead and switch our URL to just an empty string to simulate another error. And in this situation, it says there is a problem with the server, try again later. So it works as it once did, and you can see our error status is not a number, but rather a syntax error. It doesn't really matter because we have a catch-all error, and that's pretty much it. At this point, what you can do is you can remove the big comment we had from earlier and the useEffect that was just console logging the data from our hook. At this point, our site works as it once did, but our code and our definition page is much cleaner. We can reuse this hook on other pages, but that's actually what we're going to be doing in the next video. We're going to stop here because we got it all working and you should have a pretty good understanding of how hooks work. I do want to give a special thank you and shout out to another creator who inspired me in this video, and that is Pedro Tech, who has a great video on a useFetch hook. So if you want another perspective on how to do this thing, you can check out his video. The other fetches are a bit more complicated because we're dealing with access tokens and things like that, so definitely stay tuned for the next videos where we're going to work on that. Thank you for watching, and peace out.